Creative entrepreneurship as spiritual in nature. Not only is this the topic for today in our first episode of Truth and Dare, but it's also really the foundation of everything that we're talking about here. What we speak about today, and breaking down what we mean by that, by saying that creative entrepreneurship is in fact a spiritual activity that is located in spiritual territory. What we're doing today is really give you the foundation of our understanding in this space. So before we move on, I want you to take a couple steps back so you can understand what I mean. You yourself, if you look at what you're doing, if you look at your day-to-day and you look at the nature of your creations and your business around it, take a couple steps back. You know, whatever craft it is, it could be whatever. You could be a writer, you could be a musician, you could be a fashion designer, it could be so many things. Regardless of your craft, look at what it is that you're doing as a baseline. Regardless of what it is, usually you will have an idea, you will have something, some inspiration, something that is coming to you, right? And then you get to your craft and then you do your thing, and then, you know, until you finally have that output and put that out. What I want for you to reflect on is that very activity, when you're at it, really you're operating between the seen and the unseen world. You're operating between the unseen, from where you're getting the inspiration, the ideas, and ideas are of spiritual nature, right? You can't touch it, you can't see it, you can't taste it, but it's there. So where is it coming from? It's from the unseen world. So you're moving in there, you're tapping in from there, you're doing something, you're putting it out, and you're putting it into the material world. This really is you. And granted, it's everyone. It's everyone that's ever doing anything, because everything is spiritual at the end of the day, right? But what we like to forget, and it's also the reason why we're so unnecessarily harsh with ourselves sometimes, is that the scope of what we're creating is different for us. It's different for a creative entrepreneur as opposed to, the more average person in the population. Because I want you to think about this. When we speak about this process, right, of moving between the unseen world and the material world, and, collecting and tapping in and taking that and doing whatever we're doing and putting it out so that it's out there. This process does not happen only with your art. It does not just happen with, the shirt, the jacket you're creating, the logic files that you're making. Like, it's not just that. That is just one piece of the whole thing. But as a creative entrepreneur, you have to take a couple steps back and look at what you're creating as a whole lifestyle. You're creating routines. You're creating partnerships. You're creating income streams. You're creating literally your life as a lifestyle next to the creative outputs that you're having. So what that means is, and what I want you to understand, the scope of that which you are doing in this role as a creative entrepreneur, whether or not you want to assign yourself that label, right? The level of creation that is required of you is very different, much higher to that of the average person that, let's say, works a corporate job, works a job in an established system. And the reason I just mentioned that this is so often the cause for very harsh and unnecessary criticism of us towards ourselves is because we're not aware of that. We're not aware of the things that we're actually doing. We're not aware of the actual scope that is required of us. When we're like in this in-between state and we're moving things out, we're never just bringing out the art itself. At least not if you're not, just a hobby artist or a hobby creative that does their thing in the free time. If you're someone that is actually trying to live off of it and trying to build a life and a lifestyle around it, a livelihood around it, you have to be aware that the creative requirement of you is much higher, and that you very often don't give yourself credit simply because you don't understand that. And so again, even if the laws and the spiritual laws that we're talking about on this channel, even if they really and truly apply to everyone. It is for you, the creative entrepreneur, where being unaware of this actually hits you the hardest because it affects your life and your livelihood in a different way. So for today, I want to tap into some of the ways in which this unawareness kind of affects us and messes with us, whether or not we're aware of it. I'm going to share with you 3 very common struggles for creative entrepreneurs that are unaware of this spiritual nature of that which they're doing. But before we get into that, I just want to establish this understanding, a certain understanding with a very simple example, okay? Like how you can imagine this to go. Look at this simply as world maps that are available to us. Most of the world maps that are available to us, the collective world map, so to say, the collective way for us to make sense of things is rooted in the material world, in this seen world. What do I mean by that? All the things that we can see, all the things that we can touch, all the things that are already established, that are already materialized, that's what we use for orientation. That is what we use for navigation. So we have a worldly world map, so to say. And for the things that are already materialized, this is a good map. It's great. It's accurate. So that's why we can use it. But depending on which source you want to go with, check this out. The material world, the things that we can see that are manifested, like this table and this laptop and this phone and everything else, only makes up between either 0.1% up to maximum of 5%, as I said, depending on the source. This is what the material world, the things that we can see, actually made up of. The rest is energy. And then you can go on to say that even matter is energy and like low density, and that's a different topic for another day. But if we want to look at it from this, simplified perspective, be aware that the things that we can see, the things that we can touch and smell and, grab in our hands are only between 0.1 and 5% of the whole universe. And so since we have established that you are operating in that in between, what that means for you specifically, if we come back to the world map metaphor, is that the world map that you're operating with and you're running with and you're trying to make sense of with is incomplete. So while the material world map is great for the material world and things that are already materialized, the map for the things that are yet to come into existence, that are emerging, that are yet to be materialized, that world map is a different one and is governed by laws that we might not naturally understand, or rather are laws that we're just not commonly taught. And so that means we need a map that basically covers the other side of our work. And that work is naturally of spiritual nature. So let's get into the 3 very common struggles that creative entrepreneurs face as a result of being unaware of this natural law that really governs the territory that we are in as creative entrepreneurs. First one being very common struggle, okay? Loneliness. Yes, loneliness. No, you're not weird. No, it's not just you. No, there's no flaw in the system and you missed some kind of train. This is the most built-in feature of your path as a creative entrepreneur. And here's why. You have to come back to the world map example, right? And then obviously loneliness, like I'm just dropping the term like that. Obviously it's a very complex thing and it has, different faces, different facets, different contexts or whatever. But what I'm referring to is a very specific loneliness that is derived from the fact that we are who we are and we do what we do. What you will have noticed throughout your life is people simply operate off of a different world map than you. You know what I mean? You exist here. As we already established, you're here. You see, you perceive things in a more fine-tuned manner. You have literally visions coming to you. You have specific ideas. You have certain ways. You see the potential of a certain future. Like these things are completely clear to you. You have vision. You've received a vision. It's in you. It's like almost as real as the table that I'm sitting on right here. right? That's your world. This is because you exist here. But unless you're super blessed and you're super lucky, you don't necessarily have people around you, whether it's in your family or your closer friend group or the people that you grew up with, that also operate there. A lot of the times you have to look at this like whole percentage wise. We're not few, okay? But we're also not that many. So it's almost to be expected that people are not going to get you because you're here. And the people are operating on and from the material world map, whereas you're here. So what that does is you're operating on different territories. So what happens is then when you talk, you know, and you tell them stuff, it's very natural for them to be like, oh, that doesn't make any sense. Oh, but you know, that's not going to work out. And you're experiencing that over and over and over and over again until you're like, nobody gets me. Nobody gets me. That doesn't mean they don't love me. That doesn't mean they don't show up for me. They don't, you know what I mean? They don't get me. They just don't get me. So this sense of loneliness, this is now more a personal thing, but the way I have dealt with this, really. And this was during a phone call with a good friend of mine. Shout out to Nee. I was having one of those moments, and I was just like, man, like I'm just alone, man. Like, and he said something, it changed the course of my life forever. Like, he listened, you know, and he was just like, get with it. He said, get with, I don't remember if that was the actual like word that he used or like the wording, but basically he was like, get with it. This is where you are. This is who you are. This is what this thing is about. This is a natural byproduct. Basically, get with it. And now that's the thing with truth, right? And I'm also giving you this as a, not even as a disclaimer, but this is going to happen on this territory here. The stuff that I'm giving you is not always going to be, oh, fluff, like, if that's helpful for the overall cause, yes, that's what I'm going to give it to you. But if not, if the truth is the better way, truth and dare, this is what I'm going to get you, even if it's going to sting a little, which of course, you know, in the case of this, for me, it did, but it also set me free. It also made me accept the things the way they were and helped me therefore take my focus away from that, from this, oh, but why does anyone get me? And why don't they understand this? And why can't they, you know, talk to me about this? Like, you pull out all of that energy out and you're literally like, okay, this is what it is. And what I can tell you, this is kind of now beyond the scope that I had planned, but what I can tell you from my heart is that if you can reach that point where you make peace with that and you can become acquainted with it, because it is a truth, it's a universal truth. You're not everyone. You know, we don't operate the same way as everybody do. We just happen to be tasked with this. You know, when I say this, for the people that can't see me, I'm making this motion between up there, the unseen, and down here, the material, okay? I promise you that if you can find a way to accept this and make peace with this and find contentment in your heart with it, your people are going to show up. Your people are going to come. Nobody left alone for too long. Okay? If you can make peace with this. So make peace with this. So that's why I'm telling you, loneliness is a very normal and built-in part of the process. It's not nice. It's not fun. But once we can take the emotion out of it, you know, and the self-pity part of it, we can recognize that this is a byproduct of a greater game that we're playing. And that our people do exist. And that the more we can be in that, the more we can, you know, live and breathe and embody that which is given to us. Our tribe is naturally going to be attracted to us. Okay. So that was number one. Number two, very common struggles for creative entrepreneurs unaware of spiritual law is low self-esteem. Low self-esteem is the one. And why? It also goes back to the map thing. the worldly versus the spiritual map thing. Because if you think about it, what happens? You know, we're on our thing, you're on our path, we're doing our thing, we're hyper devoted and hyper, in this thing. We compare ourselves with other people. We compare, and not just that. It's not even the comparison part. We can talk about that, how that's just not helpful. But we compare our in-between work between unseen and seen. We compare this work with something that is already materialized, with something that someone already brought out. Even if you compare yourself to a creative entrepreneur, to like a fellow being, even if you do that, you're still comparing, the in-between work with something that is already materialized. And that is just not fair. And let's not even be emotional about it. It's not even just not fair. It's not accurate. It's not accurate because you are comparing, again, something from the world with something in the material, or like the in-between. The work is not the same. And therefore you cannot compare the ongoing work with something that is already out there, right? So this very often is the root of a lot of the low self-esteem. All we see is we put in so much work day in, day out. All we see is, all the opportunities we let pass, all the things that, we don't touch and we don't do that could generate something of some form that could be tangible, that can be seen today, that could blow up today. Like, we pass on all these things. We're somehow stubborn about this thing. We don't even know why, right? And still we don't have anything to show for it. That's at least what we think, because we underestimate the work that we're actually doing. Just because we can't see the work, or just because it doesn't throw you the fruits, right away, we automatically think that it's less than, because we in ourselves have an incomplete picture of the world map of that which we're doing. And having that incomplete picture leads to us viewing ourselves and our work in an incomplete way, in a wrong way. So we use the worldly map to then judge us and ourselves. Even though we're already on the path, even though we're already making these sacrifices, even though we're already down that road, our operating system, the way we judge things, including and especially ourselves, is still of the world. And this is what leads to a lot of low self-esteem, simply because we're not aware of where we are. Which leads me to point 3 of the most common struggles creative entrepreneurs face when they're unaware of spiritual law. They're kind of all interlinked, to be honest, but the last one I want to talk about today is confusion and overwhelm. I want to talk specifically about this thing because I had a lot of conversations about this with fellow creatives, of how we, it almost feels like we're watching ourselves move through the world. We're almost watching ourselves making decisions and, going with certain things, not going with other things. It almost looks like you're watching yourself because you can't really make sense of why you're moving the way you move. There's so much conviction. You're so convinced. You're like, no, this is it. But judged by the real world, you look crazy, right? Because you're letting things pass, you're letting things go that, you kind of know it's not aligned. It's just not for you. But you don't know that. You don't know that that's why you're doing it. Or maybe you do know, but you're still confused because you still, you're walking your own path. It's going to look your own way. The comfort or like whatever it is that, other people on their path might have at this point in time, you might not have that, simply because your integrity and your goal is somewhere else. Like, you're being guided by something different. But this being guided, even though it's so strong and it literally makes you make the moves that you're making and literally puts you on the path that you're on, but you still can't make sense of it, because at the end of the day, and that reinforces the loneliness, that reinforces the low self-esteem, because you can't really tell someone why, right? You can't really, there's no tangible, again, material thing that you can base this thing on. You're like, 10 toes in this thing, heavy, no justification. there's nothing safe about this path if you think about it that way, right? Because you literally don't, you just go. So what I want to talk about specifically when it comes to this is with being unaware of spiritual law and being unaware of the spiritual side of creative entrepreneurship, with being unaware of that also comes an unawareness of purpose, higher calling, an ordained path. These things are therefore never really talked about. But really, those are the reasons why we move the way we move. And so the justifications for our actions are not found in something that has already been materialized. This is an ongoing thing that is trying to come out through us, right? And I didn't plan to talk about this next, but I feel like it kind of matches now. But I also find so important, and it took me the longest to kind of figure out for myself, the craft that you're choosing, the project that you're working on, like whatever the thing is that your, creation, your creativity is, all of that is only the mask. All of that is only the vehicle through which your actual purpose is trying to come out. But it is the mask that you felt the most drawn to, that corresponds to your natural design the most, that builds on your passion, that builds on the spark that you have internally. So it's been divinely orchestrated for you to be in this craft, in this field, okay? But don't get it mixed with what this is actually about. This is actually about your task, your mission, your purpose, that thing you're here to bring into the world, the message you're here to reinforce, your light that you're meant to shine out so that other people can catch that light and it's just an upward spiral. But we'll talk about that more at another time. For now, I just want to say that this confusion and this overwhelm really comes from, yes, not being aware of spiritual law, but because of that, not being aware of higher calling and what that means and the purpose and how that shows up in our lives and how it's seeking to find its way into the world through our craft and through our creations. So those were the 3 common struggles for creative entrepreneurs unaware of spiritual law. This also wraps up episode number 1 of Truth and Dare podcast by School of 9000. We've now laid the foundation for what this podcast is going to be about in the future. This is the territory we're in. This is the world map that we're providing. This is the game that we have for the person on the path of creative entrepreneurship. And sharing this thought with you that if you really want to make this work, if you're really about this, which I know you are, that's why you're here. If you really want to make this happen, you're going to need the corresponding world map, which is why we're here. This is what we're going to do. Thank you for listening. If you guys like what you heard, share, comment. I would love for this to be a place for us to speak, to have an open dialogue, to share with each other. Way too often and for way too long, this was an area of, everybody battling out on themselves, like for themselves on their own, which is not necessary because we're actually experiencing very universally common things as a result of us being in the field that we're in. So let's have that conversation. Comment section is always open for you. That's it. Thank you guys for listening. I'll see you next time. Bye.